Good evening everyone and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update tonight, the 3rd of February 2014. My name's Chris Nitzo and big news today is the naming of a new tropical cyclone in the Australian region, Tropical Cyclone Fletcher, which has since made landfall on the Western Peninsula coastline. We also have ex-Edna, which is now also showing the potential to reform. Although that potential isn't probably as high as it was, say, 24 hours ago, it is still there. We also have a number of different low pressure systems that we are watching. There is one that could develop off the Kimberley coastline over the next few days. There's another low that hit the Northern Territory coastline just south of Wadair, and a new low that could form in the far northern Coral Sea in the wake of ex-Cyclone Edna. So we have a lot to cover. Let's get into it. Tropical Cyclone Fletcher, which has now crossed the coast, is expected to from now on not move any further to the east. It's expected to basically push to the southwest and then west-southwest, then possibly make a bit of an interaction with a tropical low that hit the Northern Territory earlier today. Look, Tropical Cyclone Fletcher. I've got so many cyclones on my mind lately that have been forming, it's hard to remember which one you're talking about. Cyclone Fletcher is not expected to develop into anything more significant than a Category 1 or maybe a very, very weak Category 2. And it really is affecting a part of the coastline that is fairly sparsely populated. If you look at the gale radius of Fletcher, you can see that it's got a lot more gales to the north, so the gale radius here is a lot larger. Now coming in off the monsoon out here from the northwest to the western quadrants, and also because it's over open waters as well. Whereas if you look at the gale radius to the southeast, it's very small. Even to the south, it's quite small. Even to the northeast, it's quite small. That being most of the case being there that we have the system over land, and so the gale radius over land is always going to be smaller than the gale radius over the water. But the other reason is obviously that there's a very strong monsoon attached to the system as well, which is making sure that the northern quadrants, so the northwest and even the western quadrant, is certainly the one to take notice of in this particular system. So over the last few hours you can see how the system is tracked now right over the top of land there. It's probably moving slightly to the northeast at the moment. It's expected, as I say, to stall and push right back over the top of where it came from and push back inland out here in the southeastern Gulf. On satellite here we can see some spiral banding wrapping around in through the north. But really overall the system doesn't look like it's that well structured. We can see this band coming in through here, so it does have a little bit of a fetch there, but really on the southeastern part of the circulation is almost not even there. So really the system is limited in intensity to the east, and that's what we saw from the bomb track map. That all that gale radius was to the west of the center. If we look at wind shear in the region, we can see that wind shear is around about moderate, so it's about 20 knots, getting up to strong if it goes anywhere further to the north. But overall at this point in time, it's got moderate shear. The shear gets better when it gets over land, but obviously for obvious reasons the system can't develop while over land. So it's really stuck in this really tight little spot here of marginally favourable conditions, and then if it heads anywhere further to the north it gets into unfavourable conditions, even though it might get into the open water. It's important to know the eye here suggesting the area of investigation has been plotted a little bit further to the south, or a little bit too far to the south on the JTWC. At the moment the system is in the teetering edge of the monsoonal westerlies to the north and the building ridge to the south here on your screen, and so what it's doing at the moment is it's walking a bit of a tightrope where it's got fairly strong steering influence from the north and fairly weak from the south, and so the northerly steering influence is dragging the system towards the east. So you're seeing the system moving in that direction, and the steering influence will change in the next 24 hours though, and the steering from the south will become stronger than the steering from the north, and we will have the system then pushing in a more southwesterly or west-southwesterly direction back into land, and that's what the Bureau of Meteorology's track map shows. So look, there's no real chance for this one to get off the East Queensland coast, if that's what some of the East Queenslanders are thinking. This one looks more than likely to head back into the Northern Territory, and then what it does after that, though, is it interacts with a tropical low moving in this direction, coming from the Northern Territory. They interact and they basically form one large broad system, and that system then continues to track in this particular direction here. So I know it gets complicated, so trust me, it was getting complicated for me trying to look through all the different possibilities, but at this stage this is the most likely possibility. This tropical cyclone will push in a southwest or west-southwest direction. A new tropical low, or a low that we've been watching off the Northern Territory coast, has now hit the Northern Territory and is now pushing in an easterly direction. Somewhere around the southwestern Gulf of Carpentaria, these systems will merge, and what will happen is we will get one large low, and that low will push in a west to west-southwest direction into Western Australia or near the Northern Territory WA border. That is our best guess estimate at this point in time based on what is going on. Speaking of the Northern Territory low, let's have a look at that through the day. Look at this little sucker intensify just as he's getting close to the Northern Territory coastline. Just there in the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf, he really kicks on. Look at this here. Spinning away like a tropical cyclone. Like, if you didn't know what the surface obs were in that region, you would swear to goodness that this was a tropical cyclone. If you look at it, it actually forms a very distinct eye feature. But we do need to remember that by this stage, when the radar starts at Wyndham here and pushes out towards where the eye was, the radar actually pushes up into the mid-levels of the atmosphere, so there may have been a slight change in where the surface circulation was and where the mid-level circulation was, but I tell you what, this thing really looked like a tropical cyclone when it hit land here on the western top-end coastline. If we look at that on visible imagery, we can see here's the centre at 9:30 Queensland time. There's the centre at 10:30 Queensland time, and there's the centre at 11:30 Queensland time. So really marked system. I tell you what, if this wasn't a cyclone, it was the closest thing possible, humanly possible to it. It really was a very nice circulation. Okay, so firstly we're going to deal with Fletcher and which way he's moving. Now we can see here, according to the GFS ensemble, over the next 5 days Fletcher will move almost, very little doubt in this, almost due west, just to the south of due west. So that's where Fletcher's expected to be in 5 days' time. Now if we look at the CMC ensemble, it sort of goes all over the shop, and really it's not one that we tend to look at a lot, but overall the consensus is that it pushes back to the west as well. Look, I can't see this happening where the system continues pushing east off the Queensland coast, so I probably wouldn't be focused too much on the outliers out here. The UK Met model also over the next 5 days has the system pushing back to the west here and lying near or on the southwestern Gulf coast. Now, interestingly, when we start looking more at the Northern Territory system, we see that that pushes into the Gulf area as well at around about the same time as Fletcher's pushing west into the same region. So what tends to happen here is probably one of two things. Because neither of these circulations are likely to be overly dominant, the Fujiwara effect may not exactly take place where one circulates around the other, or they both sort of dance. If they tend to become a broad type low pressure region or a broad low pressure system, they may morph into one large low pressure system and push in a southwest direction. And in fact, that's what most of the model guidance now has going. Yesterday we were talking about a Fujiwara interaction, which is just a bit of a dance between the two. Today we're talking more about a morphing of both the Fletcher system and this low system out here in the southwestern Gulf. Both of these coming together, forming a fairly broad region of low pressure and pushing it in a southwest direction towards the NTWA border or through inland NT at the 5-day mark, but eventually in the longer term further west towards the Kimberley or Pilbara coastline. The CMC model is also in fairly decent agreement of that track towards the Gulf, and then an interaction between it and Fletcher as well out here in the southwestern Gulf. The exact I guess, makeup of that interaction we can't tell you yet. We're not exactly sure of. But look, the resultant system should start to move back towards the southwest, towards the inland Northern Territory, and then, as I say, in the longer term, which this modelling won't go out to, in the longer term we expect it to go into the Kimberley or inland Pilbara region, possibly eventually coming off the coast and forming into a tropical cyclone or another monsoonal low type feature off the coast, but that's too far ahead. What we can say is they're going to interact in the next 2 to 4 days, and then from that interaction the resultant system will push in a west to southwest direction. I hope it's as complicated for you as it is for me, because it is certainly not something we see every season. Alright, so as we look towards the Euro's take on all of this jumbly mess that's going on out here, we can see this is Fletcher here. Not overly strong winds shown by the Euro, so it's probably underestimating the intensity of Fletcher. Now, as we head towards Wednesday morning, and we look at the interaction, here's the low, here's the low. See how they interact? That one moving east. Sorry, let me show you. That one's moving that way, that one's moving that way. Here's the region where they're sort of merging in, and they're playing with each other right in that area. And what we have afterwards is a resultant interaction where we have the one low developing, and here it is there. This becomes the dominant surface feature on the Wednesday night, and then from that it should really be, based on the current flow, it should be pushing back towards the west, back towards inland Northern Territory, and it really is, but it sort of remains very much stationary over the next couple of days after that interaction, even with quite a large ridge underneath it. So the system maybe takes a while to react to the ridge, or the ridge perhaps isn't as strong as we were modelling, or as the modelling was suggesting yesterday. And so in this particular situation, you're getting tons and tons of rain through Northern Territory, through the Gulf country. So that's very good news for the people there who have been struggling for rainfall. Now, in the longer term, as we head towards day 7, we start to see that system gets off towards the Kimberley coastline, and this is what I'm talking about. It may push off the Kimberley or East Pilbara coastline and form into a cyclone off the coast. Now, we do need to talk about something else that could develop here that we haven't even talked about yet, though, so this is just how complex everything is out there. So let's forget about Fletcher, let's forget about that low. We actually could be seeing a new tropical low forming off the Pilbara coastline as we head towards later on in this week. So as we head to Wednesday night and then Thursday morning, we don't really see many signs of it until around about the Friday time period, where we start to see a low pressure system developing really close to Broome as we head towards Friday morning. And then on Friday morning and through to Friday night, we see that low pushing further offshore, deepening quite significantly over the course of time there, so that by Saturday night it's pretty well close to tropical cyclone status. So in 24 hours it's formed, pushed well offshore, and deepened to a tropical cyclone as we head towards Saturday night and then Sunday. And look, the system continues to push more in a westerly direction, and so being that far offshore, it's probably unlikely to impact the coast as a tropical cyclone. It would have to move southeast from that particular point to impact the coast as a cyclone. It doesn't look like that's likely, but as I say, we're looking a long way ahead now in a very complex pattern, so expect that to change. But I thought it was interesting that this system forms even while we're all watching what happens in the Gulf. We've got a little silent sneaky one happening here off the coast of Broome. Although it's not too sneaky, because the GFS model picks it up here on Friday night as well, and then continues to push it west through to Saturday night. But it doesn't really develop it anywhere near as much as the European model does. As we head towards Sunday night, it keeps it as a fairly weak low. So really, folks, it's all happening out west and up north. And just when you think it couldn't get any more complex, it gets more complex. Here's ex-tropical cyclone Edna. Edna is expected to move in an easterly to southeasterly direction, push to the south, then possibly develop into a cyclone as it does so. Fairly weak one at that. and then start to become a lot slower moving in the southern Coral Sea. Now, at the same time as Edna is doing that, we have a new tropical low forming in the northern Coral Sea that is expected to push in a westerly direction towards the Queensland coast. So, Edna's the one we're all watching, and this new little low silently but surely develops in the northern Coral Sea. Now, the latest guidance we have on ex-Edna is that it will probably start to drift towards the west, but wind shear will kill it before it even gets a chance to get near the coastline. So, that is the latest guidance we have on Edna. However, the new low, the little silent low that forms up here and starts to push in a southwesterly direction towards the coast, we don't have very clear guidance on, and it doesn't look like it's going to be impacted by anywhere near as much shear as Edna. So it will be one that we will need to watch. So, folks, let's go through this complicated schmozzle that's going on out here in the Coral Sea. Alright, we have two areas of interest. Here's the first one. It lies on the northwestern edge of a bit of a shear line. Right here is the shear line. This is an area of vorticity, an area of spin that we are watching. This is another area of spin that we are watching. Watch what happens as these two systems interact with each other. So we have that area of spin continuing to push eastwards very quickly. This area of spin pushes in a south to southeast direction. And then both areas of spin push in a southerly direction. Then, while this develops into the main area of spin, guess what we have? A new spot of vorticity, or a new little weak surface low that forms out here in the northern Coral Sea. Silently, without us even watching it. It develops off the coast of Princess Charlotte Bay, pushes in an easterly direction, and while we're so busy fixated on ex-Cyclone Edna and whatever she's going to do over the next 24 to 72 hours, we might miss this one here, and this is the one that's key for the Queensland coast. So if we look at ex-Edna, she could get pretty close to cyclone status. The European suggests that it may not do so, but really it's a 50-50 probability chance here of it actually forming into a cyclone. You can see here gales wrapping around the south, but we are also watching this new low that forms in the northern Coral Sea. And if we watch these things as we go through to Thursday afternoon, we see that Edna starts to push towards the coast. The new low also will start to push towards the coast. As we head to Friday, we see that both low pressure systems head towards the coast. We see that Edna starts to lose her structure there and forms into more of a trophy type low. We have the northern Coral Sea low remains a feature. And as we head towards Friday afternoon and Friday night, we see that the Coral Sea low continues to push in a southwesterly direction towards the coast. We have Edna weakening out into a trough system. If we look at the wind shear conditions down there, as we look towards why Edna could be possibly dying, we see a fair amount of wind shear off the coast of, say, Brisbane to about Rocky. There's a lot of wind shear, 20 plus knots of wind shear. The Coral Sea low seems to want to hold its own there with very, very weak vertical wind shear. If we look at another issue, though, is the amount of moisture in the atmosphere. And what we see is that Edna tracks into an area of very dry air, and we also see the Coral Sea low being impacted by some very dry mid-level air at the same time, and that's going to limit the potential for both systems. So Edna has two things working against her here. She's got wind shear, which is moderate to high, and she's also got dry air. The Coral Sea, the northern Coral Sea low, the little silent but violent low, does have dry air trying to entrain into the circulation here. You can see it. This purple stuff is all dry air. The blue stuff is moist air. Cyclones need the blue stuff through the mid-levels of the atmosphere. They hate the purple stuff because the purple stuff kills the thunderstorms, kills the convection, and so the convection can't keep going for any length of time. So it bubbles up and then it dies. It bubbles up and dies. The blue stuff, the moist air, keeps the convection going. So it bubbles up and then continues to bubble up, and then we get new convection, and it always tries to keep the furnace going or keep the heat energy system going in the cyclone. With the dry air, it kills it off. So As we head to Friday night and into Saturday, we see that that dry air really does impact the system here. The good news here is that even ex-Edna comes towards the coast as a trough system, so there is a chance for some shower activity all up and down the Queensland coast, and we see that by the end of it, the Coral Sea low has had enough, and it just simply can't survive with all that dry air. So even the one in the northern Coral Sea weakens out into a trough system. Too much dry air impinging on the circulation here. However, look, dry air sometimes isn't very well modelled. The system will lie in very weak vertical wind shear up here in the northern Coral Sea, so please don't just think this is a done deal. If the northern Coral Sea low forms, it is in some pretty good conditions to form further. So don't just assume that this model is right. I don't like showing the GFS model a lot because it does overestimate cyclogenesis, but the one thing I do want to stress with the GFS model is it has been the most consistent model for this scenario. The last 4 runs have been suggesting something very similar. So watch this Coral Sea, northern Coral Sea low. This is on Thursday morning. This is the second latest run Thursday morning, and this is the latest run for Thursday morning coming up on your screen now. And so you can see just how similar it has been and how close it has been every single model run. And looking at the direction of movement for Friday morning in the latest run, we continue to see a Category 2 cyclone heading towards the Queensland coast. As we head to the latest, the run before that, still seeing a Category 2 cyclone heading towards the coast. And the run before that, we're still seeing a Category 1 cyclone developing in the Coral Sea. So you can see here very, very close in every model run. If we take a look at the ensemble guidance, we can see pretty tight agreement here as we head to Friday morning that there's going to be a tropical low or cyclone out here in the Coral Sea. And then as we head to Saturday morning, we see equally clear agreement that that cyclone or low will be approaching the Queensland coast. So there is, I mean, that's a pretty tight agreement there from the GFS ensemble. If we look at the ensemble guidance at 4 days in the spaghetti model plot, we see that this is really the region to look at as to where the model is suggesting the circulation will lie on the Friday morning. And then on the Saturday morning, it could be on the coast anywhere really from the probably Bowen to Rocky region. So that's where the GFS ensemble is going with this. So they are predicting a much stronger system and analysing the conditions or interpreting the conditions for the development of a cyclone in the northern to central Coral Sea as much better than the European is. So remembering that the system we're looking at here and the one that I've circled there is not going to be ex-Edna. It's going to be a new little silent low that forms in the far northern Coral Sea. So let's have eyes on the Coral Sea over the next few days to see if this comes out, if this situation eventuates. Look, it is very complex. The chances are models may have stuffed something up here, but in all fairness, we do need to watch the Coral Sea like a hawk because things can happen out there very quickly. And as I say, this circulation that we're looking at making it closer to the coast is not Edna, it's a different circulation. What we expect Edna to do is push in this direction here, southeast, south, and then sort of start to push back to the west but weaken out into a trough system. That's its expected track over its lifetime. But look, things can change. This is a different low, remembering that starts out here, pushes out here, and then comes back in towards the coast. So that's a different circulation. So this is circulation 2, and Edna is the circulation I just showed you. Alright, so there could be 2 different circulations heading towards the coast. This one we expect to weaken to a trough. This one we're not sure about. Rainfall tomorrow, folks, will be limited, I guess, to the far northern parts of the continent, except if you live in the interior part of the Northern Territory. You're going to see showers and storms creeping as far south as Alice Springs and possibly even the northern half of South Australia, I should say. We're also going to see some heavy rain here in the Northern Territory, the inland parts of the Northern Territory. We're also going to see very heavy rain in the southeastern Gulf of Carpentaria and possibly some pretty heavy falls also over the Peninsula coastline and the northern parts of the North Tropical Coast and Tablelands. If we look towards Wednesday's rainfall, that stuff, that really heavy stuff on the southeast Gulf of Carpentaria pushes back into the Gulf. We still have moderate to heavy falls all through the Gulf country, but because the lower cyclone pushes back to the west, we start to see those falls spreading out, I guess, to more of the Gulf country. We see those rainfalls easing off here in the northern half of Queensland, but still some pretty light to moderate falls there on the wet tropics coastline and also north of Princess Charlotte Bay. Also the top end, the western top end, expecting moderate to heavy falls still, and also that those falls associated with the low that hit the Northern Territory today should start pushing towards the east. Now on Wednesday and Thursday, also we've got some pretty good storm activity and shower activity over the Kimberley, remembering that we expect a new low to pop off the coast there on Friday. Now on Thursday, these two lows interact with each other in the Gulf country, and what's going to happen there is uncertain, so really this entire area could be seeing some moderate to heavy rainfall that's not being shown on the map, so just be aware of that. Also that low that pops off the coast of Broome being modelled by a lot of models now, and that happens on the Thursday and Friday, and so we're starting to see some heavy rainfall on the Kimberley coastline now, and also still some heavy falls on a fairly strong monsoon over the northwest top end. More falls here in the wet tropics coastline, even some isolated shower activity going into the central coast, Herbert Lower Burdekin, also on the far northern peninsula as well. As we head to Friday, we continue to see rainfall now starting to push onto the Queensland coast, and that could be associated with our new little low here in the northern Coral Sea pushing in a southwest direction. Edna should be a little bit further south than that and a little bit further offshore on the Friday, so this could be that second low that we mentioned in the broadcast just earlier, starting to push some shower activity onto the central coast and Whitsunday's region. Also, the region basically from about Rocky northwards could be seeing some showers as we head towards Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Just how heavy? We can't tell you yet, because that'll all depend on whether the new tropical low in the Coral Sea forms into a cyclone or not. Also, the Gulf of Carpentaria still remaining active on the Friday. It's just absolute amazing rainfalls there. And that Broome low pushes off the coast now and takes most of the rain with it as it does so. So if we look at the total forecast rainfall for the next 4 days, phenomenal rainfalls, folks, all across the far northern parts of the continent. The 4 days after that, we see that rainfall spreading into most of the Queensland coast. Now, whether or not Brisbane itself gets that rain will depend on what happens with ex-Edna and what happens with the resultant tropical low or trough system that pushes westwards. Also, the Gulf of Carpentaria remaining very active. Look, there could be up to almost a metre of rain here, believe it or not, in some parts of the Gulf over the next week. And also the northwestern parts of the top end coastline expecting some phenomenal rainfall as well. That rainfall will eventually seep into the Kimberley and Pilbara region, but maybe not in the next week. It might happen in the 7 to 10 day period. Alright folks, thanks very much. This one's a long one, and it had to be because there's just so much going on. We'll have another update, of course we will, tomorrow night, because things are so dynamic. Things can change by tomorrow night. So tomorrow night's update will be late, about 10 p.m. Queensland time. I do apologise. I have some training commitments and I can't get out of them, and nor do I really want to get out of them, and nor can I afford to get out of them with my fitness level. So 10 o'clock tomorrow night, folks, and we'll talk then. Good night.